So today we're going to talk about the effects of the Civil War, and there's a note-taking guide for you to fill in. Um, and if you have any questions about what some of them should be, you can go back to the notes from you can go back to the textbook pages, see if that'll help you. The big picture, the Civil War had a far-reaching impact on the United States. So there are some positive effects. The Union was preserved, the slaves were freed, the Union's victory showed that the states did not have the right to secede. The process of elections was shown to be valid and had to be obeyed, but reconstruction of the nation was needed. The divisions of war were not over, and the war and would continue into Reconstruction period. In the post-war period, both sides tried to recover from the devastating impact of the war. Lincoln had a plan for Reconstruction, which he issued before the surrender of Appomattox. He made the plan an easy one for the South because he wanted them to surrender. However, he may have changed his plan if he had not been assassinated. Reconstruction of the nation was needed because the Southern governments kept insisting on not giving rights to African Americans. The state governments passed laws called Black Codes that stated what African Americans could and could not do. These laws limited their rights, so the federal government started a military reconstruction plan that protected the rights of freedmen, and the states were to make new state constitutions that included the rights given in the new 14th and 15th Amendments, which we'll talk about in the next unit. The physical environment was affected. The North affected very little since only a few battles were fought there. The South was devastated. Entire cities were burned. Plantations were destroyed. Thousands of acres of farmland were ruined. Fields were left unplanted since there were no slave labor to plant and harvest cash crops. The soldiers were affected. In both regions, many young men from both sides fought in the war. Members of the same family had supported different sides. The wealthy were often able to pay for someone else to take their place. At first, the war was an adventure, but soon became a challenge of endurance and survival. The war was long, and the soldiers often had little food, clean water, shelter, and clothes. Over 600,000 men on both sides died. Over 1,100,000 were injured, and many lost arms and legs. In the South, planters were exempt from serving in the war if they owned more than 20 slaves. And in the North, it doesn't show up, but you could pay to not serve in the war. Women were affected. In both regions, women were left in charge of their homes and farms or businesses while the men were away fighting. Because so many men died in the war, many women had to continue managing their families after the war. Women served as nurses or workers in factories during the war in the North. Others rolled bandages or knitted socks at home to send to soldiers. In the South, women were left to manage their families and continue operating the farms and plantations. They also served as nurses, and they had to continue managing during the difficult period of rebuilding after the war. African Americans were affected. During the war, some African American slaves ran away from plantations. Others continued to work the fields and waited. After the Emancipation Proclamation, African Americans were allowed to join the Union Army. After the war, many former slaves left the plantations. Many went looking for loved ones that were sold away. Few freedmen went to the North. Most soon returned to the areas they knew. Some even returned to their old plantations where they worked as sharecroppers. African Americans created their own communities. They began school to get an education. They participated in politics and served in Congress. Civilians. In the North, people did not suffer from lack of food and supplies. The war started businesses as the government granted contracts for industries to make military supplies. The government issued paper money that kept its value after the war. Factories continued to produce goods even though immigration slowed down. And in the South, the civilian population suffered from lack of food and supplies because of the blockade and the disruption of agriculture. There were bread riots in some places, and the Confederate money was worthless after the war. The slaves were free, so the planters lost their labor force and a great deal of their wealth. So hopefully you got to fill out your note-taking guide on the impact and effects of Civil War. If you didn't, go back through this video or the PDF and also go back through the textbook and you should be able to find all of them.